Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that the internet no longer helps people understand each other. Instead, it quietly turns neighbors into enemies, friends into strangers, and entire societies into opposing camps that no longer trust one another. Every recommendation seems harmless on its own, yet together they shape how millions of people see reality. Public debates become increasingly hostile, and people who have never met begin to hate each other with astonishing confidence. Most of us blame social media, believing its algorithms trap us inside invisible bubbles that feed us only opinions we already agree with. It sounds convincing. It has been repeated for years. But what if that explanation is incomplete? What if the real problem is not simply what the internet shows us, but the way our own brains react to an online world they were never designed to handle? Understanding this changes everything about how we think about social media, human psychology, and even the future of civilization itself. Over the past decade, surveys from different countries have revealed a trust between citizens has declined, and many people now believe society is becoming impossible to unite again. In several democracies, support for political violence has risen to levels that would have seemed unimaginable only a generation ago. It is easy to assume that algorithms deserve all the blame. After all, social media platforms constantly recommend videos, articles, and posts designed to keep us engaged for as long as possible. We spend hours scrolling through endless content, feeling more anxious, more frustrated, and often more emotionally exhausted than before we open the app. The internet was originally celebrated as a tool that would connect humanity across borders, cultures, and languages. Instead, many people now see it as one of the greatest sources of division in modern history. But according to recent psychological and behavioral research, this story is more complicated than it first appears. For years, one idea dominated discussions about online polarization. It became known as the filter bubble theory. The concept seemed simple. Algorithms study your behavior, learn your preferences, and gradually surround you with opinions that match your own beliefs. Conflicting ideas disappear, while familiar viewpoints become more common until they begin to feel like universal truth, because you rarely encounter anyone who seriously disagrees with you. It is an elegant explanation, and for a long time, many people accepted it, almost without question. But when researchers began analyzing what millions of users actually saw online through search engines, news feeds, and social media platforms, they discovered something surprising. Most people were not living inside perfectly isolated ideological bubbles. In fact, they were exposed to opposing opinions far more often than expected. The internet was not hiding disagreement. It was constantly placing disagreement directly in front of our eyes. That discovery forced scientists to reconsider one of the biggest assumptions about the digital age. It is often not the internet at all. It is everyday life. Think about your closest relationships. Your family members usually share many of your values. Your friends often have similar interests. Your coworkers, neighbors, classmates, and local communities frequently come from comparable cultural backgrounds and life experiences. Long before social media existed, most people naturally lived among individuals who were relatively similar, but by geography, culture, education, and routines. Suddenly, millions of strangers with completely different beliefs become only one click away, confronting us with perspectives we would never have encountered in our normal lives. At first glance, this should have made humanity more open-minded. Instead, many people have become even more polarized. This contradiction puzzled researchers for years until they began looking less at technology and more at human evolution. The answer was hiding inside the human brain itself. Our brains were never designed to process the endless stream of disagreement that the modern internet delivers every single day. They evolved in a completely different environment, where survival depended not on understanding billions of strangers, but on cooperating with a few dozen familiar people. The internet did not invent division. It simply placed an ancient brain inside a completely new social environment that it struggles to interpret correctly. If you are finding this documentary thought-provoking so far, take a moment to share where you are watching from and tell us whether you think social media is bringing people closer together or pushing them further apart. It will be interesting to see how opinions differ across countries while we continue exploring what science says about the internet and the human mind. Human evolution was shaped over hundreds of thousands of years by one simple reality. Survival depended on belonging to a group. Early humans who were accepted by their tribe had access to food, protection, and cooperation. Those who were rejected often faced starvation, predators, or isolation that could quickly become fatal. As a result, our brains became extraordinarily sensitive to social acceptance and rejection. Even today, criticism from strangers online can trigger emotional reactions that seem completely disproportionate to the actual situation. This happens because the same neurological systems that once protected our ancestors from life-threatening exclusion continue operating inside modern society. But our brains often respond to it as though every disagreement represents a real challenge to our place within a community. For thousands of years, human communities remained relatively small. You might have disagreed with your neighbor about how to divide farmland, settle a dispute, or raise a family, but your relationship was built on far more than those disagreements. You attended the same festivals, celebrated the same traditions, relied on the same marketplace, and faced the same dangers together. You cheered for the same local team, worshipped in the same place, and depended on each other whenever disaster struck. Those countless shared experiences acted as invisible bridges that connected people even when they argued fiercely. Disagreements certainly existed, but they rarely became someone's entire identity. Because your brain naturally understood that a person could disagree with you on one issue while still belonging to your community. Those shared experiences formed the social glue that allowed societies to remain stable, despite constant differences of opinion. Kingdoms, and eventually modern nations, that social glue became more complicated, but never completely disappeared. Competing ideas and political movements challenged existing beliefs. Public disagreements became louder. Even fierce political rivals often lived in the same neighborhoods, worked in the same institutions, and participated in the same cultural traditions. Conflict itself was never the true problem. Every generation questions the values of the previous one, and society gradually changes because different ideas compete against each other. Healthy disagreement is not a weakness of civilization. It is one of the reasons civilization continues to evolve. The real danger begins when disagreement completely replaces every other part of a person's identity. Roughly 2 decades ago, humanity introduced something our ancestors could never have imagined. For the first time in history, billions of people entered the same digital public square. Unlike a traditional town square, however, this one had no physical limits, no shared culture, and no natural barriers separating conversations. Every day, your brain now encounters thousands of opinions from complete strangers. Most of these people share nothing with your everyday life. They do not live in your neighborhood, work beside you, or belong to your community. They appear on your screen as isolated opinions disconnected from any personal relationship. Instead of seeing another human being with a complex life, your mind often reduces them to nothing more than the opinion they just expressed. Psychologists describe part of this process as social sorting. Without conscious effort, your brain constantly organizes people into groups based on shared beliefs, values, and identities. This behavior once served an important evolutionary purpose. Online, however, this ancient mechanism begins producing distorted results. When someone posts an opinion that directly challenges your worldview, your brain lacks all the contextual information that normally creates empathy. You do not know their family, their personality, their struggles, or the experiences that shape their beliefs. All your brain sees is disagreement. As a result, that disagreement becomes one of the defining features of the person's identity, making it increasingly difficult to view them as someone who simply thinks differently rather than someone fundamentally different from you, even if you have never met that individual before. Their arguments appear more reasonable, their intentions seem more trustworthy, and information supporting your shared perspective feels naturally believable. The result is not necessarily blind loyalty, but an unconscious bias that influences how evidence is evaluated before elections. This happens across every ideology, nationality, religion, and political movement because it reflects a basic to one particular group. Social media platforms unintentionally intensify this process because their business model rewards attention above everything else. Their algorithms are designed to maximize engagement, and few emotions generate engagement more effectively than outrage, or remain online for extended periods. Anger, however, is remarkably effective at capturing attention. Content that provokes and keeps users emotionally invested for longer periods. Over time, the algorithm learns that emotionally charged material consistently performs better than balanced discussion. Without deliberately trying to divide society, these systems gradually amplify the loudest conflicts, where the most extreme disagreements become the most visible, giving users the impression that hostility represents the norm rather than the exception. Another consequence is that individual identities become compressed into simple categories. In real life, every person is a mixture of countless characteristics. They have hobbies, careers, families, favorite books, childhood memories, personal ambitions, and complicated beliefs. Online, much of that complexity disappears. A single opinion posted in a few sentences often becomes the defining feature by which others judge an entire person. Suddenly, preferences in entertainment, clothing, lifestyle, religion, education, and politics begin merging into one simplified identity. People are no longer viewed as individuals with unique experiences, but as representatives of opposing teams, because it appears to involve entire groups rather than isolated opinions. This simplified perception also encourages the most extreme voices from another group. Your brain gradually begins associating those extreme views with everyone inside that category. Instead of recognizing that every community contains moderate, reasonable, and diverse individuals, the mind starts believing that the loudest examples represent the majority. Negative stories become easier to accept without careful examination, because they reinforce the mental model your brain has already created. This psychological shortcut saves mental effort, but it comes at the cost of accuracy. Entire populations become reduced to stereotypes built from the most visible and emotionally provocative examples rather than from reality itself, and begin reshaping society as a whole. Trust declines, compromise becomes increasingly difficult. Instead, they begin viewing one another as existential threats whose success would permanently damage society. Democracies rely on the assumptions that people with competing ideas can still cooperate within shared institutions. The challenge facing modern society is therefore much deeper than social media. It is the collision between ancient evolutionary instincts and a digital environment unlike anything humanity has ever experienced. The question is no longer whether the internet changes our behavior. The real question is whether we can learn to adapt before those changes permanently reshape the way the human societies function. If all of this sounds discouraging, there is also a reason for optimism. Understanding the problem is the first step toward solving it. The internet is not an unstoppable force that controls human behavior without resistance. It influences us. The goal is not to abandon technology or disconnect from the online world completely. The internet has brought extraordinary benefits to education, communication, science, and global cooperation. The challenge is learning how to use it without allowing it to exploit the parts of our minds that were designed for a much smaller and simpler world. Just as humanity adapted to agriculture, cities, printing presses, radio, and television, we now face another major transition that demands new habits rather than old instincts. One of the most important changes begins with questioning our own certainty. Every person believes they are being rational, yet our brains constantly rely on shortcuts that operate beneath conscious awareness. Before accepting a headline, sharing a viral post, or dismissing someone else's opinion, it is worth asking a simple question. Am I evaluating this information because of the evidence itself, or because I already like or dislike the person presenting it? That single moment of self-reflection can interrupt the automatic process of social sorting. It reminds us that facts do not become true simply because they come from people we agree with, nor do they become false because they come from people we dislike. Critical thinking is not about distrusting everything. It is about applying the same standards of evidence to allies and opponents alike, even when doing so feels uncomfortable. Another lesson comes from remembering what the internet looked like before social media dominated nearly every online experience. The early web was far more decentralized. Instead of a hands for everyone's attention, countless smaller communities existed independently. People gathered in forums, message boards, rather than constant engagement. A photography forum attracted photographers. A science community attracted science enthusiasts. Gaming communities focused on games. Discussions still became heated, but they happened inside environments where participants shared enough common interest to maintain a sense of community. Enormous social media platforms ever could. Perhaps that older model offers an important clue for the future. Human beings naturally function better inside communities where shared interests outweigh constant ideological conflict. Smaller online spaces encourage familiarity. When people recognize each other as individuals rather than profile pictures, discussions often become more respectful than a stranger who appears on your timeline for only a few seconds. While smaller communities cannot eliminate disagreement, they create enough shared identity to prevent disagreement from becoming the only thing people see. The solution may not be making one enormous digital town square healthier. It may be rebuilding thousands of smaller neighborhoods where genuine communities can grow again. At the same time, every comment, every repost, every reaction, and every conversation helps shape the online environment experienced by not to spread outrage simply because it is emotionally satisfying may seem insignificant, But multiplied across billions of users, algorithms respond to human behavior. If outrage consistently attracts attention, platforms will continue promoting it. Technology adapts to incentives, and incentives are ultimately of the people using it. There is another perspective that becomes easy to forget while spending hours online. Behind every username is a real human being whose life extends far beyond the opinion displayed on a screen. That person has people they love, fears they rarely express, challenges, sentences, or a short video, encouraging us to believe we fully understand someone after only seconds of exposure. Recognizing that limitation does not require agreeing with everyone. It simply means acknowledging that every person is far more complex than the algorithm allows us to see. That awareness alone can make disagreement less hostile and conversation more productive. The greatest irony is that despite all the divisions dominating our screens, humanity has never been more connected than it is today. We share the same planet, depend on the same climate, face many of the same technological challenges, and increasingly rely on one another through global trade, science, and communication. They involve disease, environmental change, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, or economic instability across cultures, nations, and political systems. Our brains may instinctively divide people into opposing teams. The internet has the potential to strengthen that cooperation instead of weakening it. Whether it becomes a bridge or a barrier depends largely on how wisely we choose to use it. The story of the internet is still being written. Social media represents only a brief moment in the history of human communication, not its final chapter. Future generations may look back on this era as the difficult transition period when humanity first learned how to live inside a permanently connected world. They may develop healthier platforms, better educational systems, and stronger digital habits that reduce polarization instead of accelerating it. The action we take will not be decided by technology alone. It will be shaped by billions of individual choices made every single day. What we believe, what we share, what we ignore, and how we treat people whose experiences differ from our own. The future of the internet is ultimately a reflection of the future we choose for ourselves. If this documentary changed the way you think about social media and the human mind, make sure to subscribe and join us for more in-depth documentaries that explore the hidden forces shaping our world. And before you leave, tell us in the comments one habit you think could make the internet a better place. Your perspective might inspire someone else to see the online world differently.